Welcome to Connected, Automated, Electric, a podcast series brought to you by the National Electric Vehicle Consortium. You will hear experts from industry, agencies, and academia describe the broad spectrum of technologies that comprise the EV sector with a particular focus on preparing the skilled technical workforce. These technicians work in all of the EV sectors, including manufacturing, operations, system installation, and charging infrastructure. I'm your host, Mike Lisecki, and let me remind you that the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsor, the National Science Foundation. Our guest today is Blain Newton. He's the COO at Beta Technologies. And Beta Technologies is an electric aerospace company. Blain is responsible for finance and operations at Beta. And Blain, I like the tagline on the company's website, the future of flight. I really like that. So Blain, would you tell us a bit about Beta Technologies? Remember, our audience is more attuned to the electric vehicle, the ground-based systems, but they're extremely interested in flight. So if you give us a sense of the company and then yourself and what you do there.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So Beta is one of a number of electric aerospace companies that have started over the last several years. And we're based here in Burlington, Vermont, and we're working on a few different things, a few different projects. So we're building not only a all-electric fixed-wing aircraft, but an all-electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft as well, along with charging systems that are not only interoperable, so any electric aircraft can charge on them, but also multimodal, so you can charge ground vehicles. And we're deploying those all over the U.S. right now. We'll talk a little bit about why we got started or how we got started in a minute, but a little about myself first. So I grew up around aviation. My stepfather was in the Air Force, and I spent a fair amount of time at the base just looking at airplanes, and got my first ride in a Lancaster bomber. I was just talking about this last night with somebody. My first ride in a Lancaster bomber, which is just a legendary World War II bomber, which I didn't know was rare at the time. I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and it just kind of gave me the bug. My dream was to be a fighter pilot, and I took a detour on that dream and ended up getting into healthcare technology and data and analytics, and ran healthcare companies around the world for a while. And about in 2019, about 5 years ago, I got a call to join Beta, initially as CFO, as one of the early first non-engineers that was hired. And I got hired really to help stand up the infrastructure to support the products that the engineering team was bringing to market. And I was maybe employee 35, somewhere in that mid-30s range, and we're over 650 now, continuing to grow. And I've shifted from the CFO really over to Chief Operating Officer, where I'm responsible is for most of the number of the things that you already mentioned, but really kind of our commercial approach, our commercial strategy, as well as our production operations and our digital operations team. So, but yeah, thrilled to be here chatting with you today, Mike, and to share a little bit about what we're doing.
Thanks, Blain. I can only imagine being in one of those Lancasters. That must have been really something.
Yeah, the sound, I can still remember the sound those engines made. It was just such a distinct sound. And, it was funny because it was at that air show, it was an air show that my stepfather helped organize. They had a Harrier jet, which was fascinating to look at, but I was just glued to the World War II, warbirds, the P-51, and then obviously the Lancaster. And it was just, like I said, it got me hooked in a way. And now to be able to be a part of the electrification of aviation and this next generation of mobility is just, you couldn't ask for more. And we're right at that cusp where technology and Mother Nature have kind of come together to allow for commercially viable working aircraft in cargo, logistics, medical, and passenger. And so we're just really excited to be pushing forward to, not only bring new forms of mobility due to the lower cost of operations, but also we're on a mission to decarbonize aviation. It's going to take a few decades, but we're just at the starting line now.
Right. Blain, our audience, they have a perception, I'm saying this, of course, in general, that electric aerospace is just way there out in the future. But if you listen to some of the comments you just made, you're deploying vehicles, aircraft now. So just give us a little more perspective of what the challenges are. Like we as an audience that doesn't maybe know as much here, we're not sure what the challenge is. Is it charging? Is it regulatory as just simply technology, as an ability to lift payload. What are the challenges associated with electric aircraft today, and how can you address those challenges? Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a few there, Mike. So certainly, as with kind of the EV adoption in the early days, not having a robust charging infrastructure out in the wild is a bit self-limiting, right? And so we started early on developing charging standards, and we actually chaired the a working group in a trade association called GAMA, the General Aerospace Manufacturing Association, and we put forward a charging standard that was adopted by the broader industry and most of the leaders in the space. And which getting on a standard charging platform, I think, is a big unlock and was a big challenge. And now deploying these. And, at first it was taking us quite a bit of time to deploy these. You had to work with the FAA, you had to work with local municipalities, permitting, and electric companies to run the lines. But we've kind of gotten it down into a bit more streamlined way, and we can deploy these relatively quickly within a handful of months. We now have over 20 up and down the East Coast deployed, with another 50 in various phases of construction. So we actually flew our aircraft. This is a pre-certified aircraft, pre-production aircraft. It's a prototype, really a test rig that we've flown basically the equivalent of almost twice around the world at this point. But we flew it from Burlington, Vermont, all the way down to the Panhandle of Florida using our charging network. So being able to move up and down the East Coast is a challenge, but it's a challenge that we in the industry are solving. The other challenge is regulatory, and it's not because we don't have a very willing partner in the FAA and other regulators around the world. This is simply something that they haven't done before. And, you take a bunch of folks like us that, while we have a lot of people on the team that have certified aircraft before, we also have a lot of folks building high voltage electric systems that came out of automotive and haven't had to go through that regulatory challenge. So it's been a bit of an education on both sides. But what we're seeing is that the regulators and ourselves want to see this happen. It's a meaningful step change in aerospace, and regulators are leaning in. We're on a path to certify our fixed wing aircraft by 2025 and the vertical takeoff and landing in 2026. So this is not something that's decades away. We've flown out to Bentonville, Arkansas and back, and Louisville, Kentucky, and then back, like I said, down to Florida in the flight restricted zone in Washington, D.C., which is a fairly rare thing for a small general aviation aircraft to do. And then up and down the Hudson and around the Statue of Liberty in New York. So we've flown in some of the busiest airspace in the world on our own charging network. So the challenges are there, but you just kind of keep moving forward and pushing and get there. And on the technology side, we're I think, I don't know if your listeners pay attention to space at all, but there was a pretty big moment in our little industry a few weeks ago where we've been testing our aircraft for now 4 years, and every single one of our flight tests has had a pilot, and that's fairly rare in the space. You see a lot of remotely piloted aircraft in the space that will eventually be piloted, but for their assessment of safety, they don't want to put pilots in it. But we've looked at it the other way. We took the rusty nut off first, right? Which is make it safe so a pilot can fly every single time. Yeah. And through that envelope expansion, we recently flew through what's called transition, which is from thrust-borne or hover flight to wing-borne flight, where you're moving forward with lift generated from the wing. And we were the first in the world in this size class of aircraft to do that, to do this what's called a piloted transition. And it kind of showed us, and then it showed, I think, the rest of the industry that the technology is ready. There's still a lot of work to do to refine it, but we're in that refinement phase. This isn't kind of a science experiment anymore. It's moving towards manufacturing. So like on all fronts, there's certainly challenges, and they're not insurmountable, but we're making great progress in it for sure.
Blain, just to calibrate us, what is the size of one of these types of aircraft? I mean, how do you define the size? Is it a weight-based thing? Is it a volume or dimensions? How do you define the size of one of these aircrafts?
Yeah, so the FAA defines the different classes of aircraft by weight, and ours is a 7,000-pound aircraft, which is kind of the limit of this certification class that we're in. To contextualize that a little bit, it's a 50-foot wingspan, and it carries about as much as the inside of one of those big brown UPS delivery trucks, right? So it's 5 passengers plus pilot. with a lot of leg room, and it's three pallets of cargo, kind of standard sized cargo pallets. So it's a big aircraft, right? It's not kind of a drone. This is a real working aircraft.
It certainly sounds like it. I was just thinking as you're talking about the flights you've accomplished, how does one define range for an electric aircraft? Okay, so I've got a Tesla that has a 330-mile range. Is there a similar figure that can be used for electric aircraft?
It really is dependent, right? So there's an awful lot of companies in this space, and they're going after different mission sets. And so if you're building just for a short hop passenger mission, you're going to make different design changes. So a number of folks in the space are going after what's called urban air mobility, or hopping people over traffic in big urban centers. We're looking at more of a regional air mobility mission, and we can chat a little bit about why we chose that. But getting to your question, and that's defined more like, think of it, Albany to New York City, or a Burlington, Vermont to Manchester, New Hampshire, or that kind of mid-mile type delivery schema. You certainly could use our aircraft for urban air mobility, and it's kind of, think 4 passengers with luggage going from Chicago O'Hare to the Loop, right? It'd be a real time saver there. But at the end of the day, the range is highly dependent on mission and aircraft design. I will say that with our prototype aircraft, we actually flew 336 nautical miles, which is about 386 statute miles, with 50 miles left in reserve. So we will likely come down from that range in a certified aircraft to begin with, just because you add additional safety margin through the FAA certification process. What I will say, Mike, and this to me is the most exciting part of this new era in mobility, is that battery energy density is getting better and better and better every single year, right? We've seen 15, 20% jumps over the last handful of years since we've begun testing. And we have cells in our Advanced Research Center in St. Albans, Vermont, which is incidentally an old Energizer battery facility that we kind of repurposed, that are 20, 30, 40% more energy dense. Now, those are years away from being commercialized, but the point is that this airframe will get better and better every few years as we swap out the batteries for better batteries. And so it's the first time in aviation history where a customer can buy an aircraft and it actually gets better over its life instead of degrading over its life. And that's a huge step function change.
As you mentioned, though, that improvement in energy density in the batteries is going to translate either to weight or cargo carrying capacity in one sense or another, right?
That's right. It's a linear trade between range and payload, or speed, I guess, if you get that in as well. And so our customers can determine how they want to take advantage of that benefit. And it's a little different than automotive, right? You're likely not going to take and swap out the batteries of your Tesla or my Rivian, right? It's just right. The cost is prohibitive to do that, so you're just going to buy a new car when the batteries degrade to a certain point. But in aviation, this aircraft is designed to last for 40,000 cycles, flight hours, right? This is a 25-year asset, maybe longer. And so we've designed the batteries to be highly modularized, so you can take them out every couple of years as they begin to degrade relatively quickly, and then reinstall them. And as a percentage of kind of total operating cost, it makes sense to do that, right? So the big driver for the switch to electric is not because they're green and sustainable. That's a beautiful byproduct. But the real driver here is that you lower the cost significantly, right? And if you look at, for instance, fuel costs, we have a Cessna 208 Caravan, which is a similar sized turbine-powered aircraft. It's a great airplane. It's been around for years and years and years. It's kind of the leader in cargo feeder logistics, and there's a lot of passenger applications as well. And we fly that when we go on the road with our electric aircraft, just so that so the support team can be with it. And on one flight through the Midwest, it was a little over 2-hour flight. We landed the Caravan and had to fuel up with jet fuel. And it cost $750 in jet fuel. Then we plugged into our charger. Then it cost us $17 in energy. So you've effectively rendered fuel cost irrelevant. The maintenance cost, if you think about the turbine engine, the PT6 turbine engine that's on that Caravan, it's an absolutely phenomenal engine. It got certified in 1963, and it's still the leader in the fleet, right? This is not new technology, but it's proven reliable. But it's got thousands and thousands of parts, maybe 25,000 parts. I don't know. It gets really, really hot, and it's a series of explosions happening inside of it, right? And it's getting 800 degrees Celsius. our motor that we're certifying independently as well puts off about as much power as that PT6 and has 25 parts, one moving part. And it only gets to about 80 degrees C at peak, and you cruise at about 30 degrees, 30, 40, 50 degrees C. So the motors just don't degrade. They don't break down. So the maintenance cost is incredibly low. So what dominates the operating cost is battery replacement. And it's about 2/3 of operating costs. But even with that, Mike, you're flying around in a fixed wing aircraft with comparable performance from a payload volume perspective as the Caravan at $265 an hour, all in, including the pilot, whereas that Caravan is $1,300 to $1,400 an hour.
Wow.
So it's just changed. It changed what missions are available, right? So that's the real win.
Blain, many of our listeners work at community colleges in technical education programs, preparing technicians for working in the electric vehicle workforce of today and of the future. So thinking back to at Beta and your experience, let's think about workforce now for a moment. You mentioned people working in high voltage. Obviously, you have electromechanical systems, you have charging systems. Do you see gaps in the type of workforce that Beta is looking for? Are you getting the skills that you need? Are there skill gaps that you will need to address in the future? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And, there are skill gaps for sure, both kind of universally and as well in New England, where we're based. And we kind of feel them a little pretty acutely because we're highly verticalized. So we design and build all of our own propulsion systems, fly-by-wire systems, all the power electronics, inverters, battery systems, not battery cell technology, but battery systems around the cells. And we do all of the final assembly, including carbon fiber assembly and some carbon fiber layup. So we're highly verticalized. So we hit the entire value chain. And while we've been really fortunate to be able to staff with really competent, capable, committed, passionate people, as we grow and need to add not tens, but hundreds over the next several years to put out the 600 or 700 aircraft a year that we see forecasted by the end of the decade, we're just going to need more people. And our community engagement and educational engagement folks have done just a remarkable job. And I think you're going to be talking to Sarah Deshaw at some point, right? Later on, potentially. And we're developing programs and identifying talent where talent exists, right? And that's kind of from everywhere. I grew up in a really small town in upstate New York, and opportunities were hard to come by. But when companies did reach in and work with local tech schools, magical things happened, and we're seeing that all over our region. So we have a pretty cool example at a school called CB Tech, and the leader there, Michelle Friedman, is just a really forward-looking educator. And we partnered with her a few years ago on an aerospace coatings application specialist program, which effectively is aircraft paint, right? Mm-hmm. It's a FAA recognized certification that basically these kids can go anywhere in aerospace and get a really high paying job because of the certificate. And they're graduating high school with an FAA recognized certificate that they can take with them anywhere in the world. And we set up, we believe it's the first of its kind in the country, this program with CB Tech, and have graduated now 2 cohorts of 11 kids, including the first female to go through it this past spring. And, it's just, and we're going to be hiring many of those kids on if they choose to come work for us at our paint center that we're developing in upstate New York at the Plattsburgh International Airport, the former U.S. Air Force Base. And you look at, and we have similar examples in Rutland, Vermont, Stratford Tech doing work with advanced composites. And we're doing similar work with Burlington Technical Center on propulsion systems and high voltage systems. And so reaching into these high schools and continuing education centers to drive it forward. And there's this pretty incredible story when I was over at CB Tech during the first cohort graduation. And one of the kids came over to me and I said, hey, and he did really, really well in the class. I think he kind of tested top out of the class. And he told me, he said, I've been in and out of foster care. My parents have been in and out of jail. Like, I didn't think, I had much of a choice. And I saw this come in, and he loves working with his hands. Works on his car all the time. And he said, you through this program, you've changed the trajectory of my family. Mm. And it's just remarkable that if you just put in a bit of effort, you can solve not only the needs of the business, but ideally tap into something in a community and inspire these folks to do something really, really meaningful. And so again, there are gaps, but everything is solvable. Like we like to use this Voltaire quote occasionally at Beta, and it's, no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. And so if you really just dig in and try to understand deeply what the problem is, not get fixated on solutions, you can solve anything from technology challenges to workforce development programs. You just have to get creative and do the work.
It's a good point, Blain. A company that's really connected with their community could just make such a difference for both sides, right, going forward.
Yeah, and at some level you have to, right? If we've worked really hard to engage the community. We have a program called Study Hall where we build a bunch of working demonstrations of our technology, from propulsion systems to the batteries to inverters and you name it, along with what looks to be a really nicely restored old Airstream, one of the silver Airstream trailers that has a state-of-the-art fully immersive simulator inside it, along with a VR sim. And we take those on the road to high schools and elementary schools all over the region. And we've exposed, I don't know, the last number I heard was 4,500 kids. It's probably more than that now in the last 12 months to this technology, and just at all ages, from kindergarten up through senior year. And you see the looks on these kids' faces when they get to sit in a simulator and fly this technology. And you can just tell that you're unlocking something special for the future.
I'd like to be in one of those simulators.
Anytime, Mike. We'd love to get you in one.
All right, cool. Let's suppose someone comes for an interview at Beta and you're interested in their skill sets. Do you think, or do you maybe question them about things like their knowledge of cybersecurity, the connection of Internet of Things devices? Do you ask questions like that, or is that something that you'll bring them up to speed internally when they arrive? How do you approach those type of skill sets other than electromechanical, high voltage side of things?
It's a mix of both, right? I mean, I think we'd be naive to think that we can train everything there is to know about things like cybersecurity, and we recognize the incredible importance of both physical and digital security in this space, right? We have contracts with the U.S. Air Force and Army and big companies like UPS. We need to be locked down. So there's certainly roles that we will hire specifically for a skill set, and maybe that's expertise in, advanced fly-by-wire systems. That's a really hard thing to train. That's, years and years and years of schooling. But, generally speaking, we hire for passion more than skills necessarily, right? If we're looking for, electrical engineers, for example, we'll put them through the same screening process we put through everyone else through, which is a pretty exhaustive process. And it includes understanding our folks passionate about and share the values with the rest of the team at Beta. We really focus on diversity of background and experience and thought, but generally speaking, you still have to share the values. That's how magic happens. So we screen for 3 passions. Ideally, you have 2 of them, because if you share 2 out of 3 passions, then you mathematically share a passion with every single person in the business. So we screen for a passion for aviation, a passion for environmental sustainability, and a passion for really just a technological curiosity at the highest level. You just want to uncover problems. And we find if you and to me, that's the biggest predictor of success. If you hire really bright folks that are just intellectually curious, amazing things happen. And so when they come in, this happens with our interns as well. We had, 1,000 interns apply, probably more than that. We're going to have about 80 on staff, and we end up having about 80 every year. It seems to be a number it works with us. And we've hired a number of them on. I think 25 or so have come on board full time in the last couple of years. And it's an amazing talent pool. This includes high school job shadow, includes internships, it's co-ops, apprenticeships. And this isn't the kind of go get your cup of coffee type intern. These folks are solving some of the hardest problems that we have. One of the interns, we're moving these battery packs that are pretty, there's 5 in the aircraft, and each weigh, 550 pounds. Moving them around is non-trivial. They stay in the aircraft virtually all the time, but when you take them out, you got to move them. And he developed with a couple other interns, and this was his idea. No one said, hey, go do this. A laser guided 360 degree freedom of motion robot with a hydraulic lift system that could place itself, lift itself up, grab the battery and drop it down and move it over to where it needed to go. Another group of interns did all of the low voltage integration of our second prototype. They did all of the wiring for a flight test vehicle, right? It comes with the unlock of letting people run and make mistakes, share the knowledge, learn from those mistakes, and move quickly. And again, so it comes down to passion as much as it does skills, Mike. For us, we can train the skills if people want to learn them.
It sounds like it's a really interesting approach, right? You look for those, you mentioned 2 out of those 3 sets, one of the important ones being the passion to be there. And I think that's just critical, right? For people to have a real career at a company instead of just a job, but a real career.
Yeah, if you're coming to Beta for just a job, you're probably going to get overrun. The people, we don't have we have an org structure, but it's not a command and control hierarchy. It's an organizational tool to get work coordinated. But we expect everyone in the team, from an intern to a welder to a PhD level scientist, to make decisions within their domain and make them quickly. And, the organizing principle of our business is define a goal that's a little bit out of reach, hire really smart people, give them the tools and training they need, and then get the hell out of the way. There's no way that I'm going to know more than a data scientist that I hire about how to use generative AI on a digital twin manufacturing floor. That's why I hired the person, right? So it's always been interesting to me to see corporations set themselves up with this command and control hierarchy, when in reality, the belief system there says that you have to know more than the people you're commanding and controlling, and that's rarely the case if you're doing it right. And so, but to make that work, you have to hire people that are willing to take risks, willing to share where they missed, willing to learn from it, and willing to get really just passionate about the problem they're trying to solve.
Good point. Blain, as we're wrapping up today, take out your crystal ball. What does the future look like for electric aircraft? Maybe 20 years from now, let's say 2045. What does it look like? You mentioned regional mobility. Is it going beyond that? Is it intensifying that? What do you see in that crystal ball?
Boy, I wish I had a crystal ball, Mike. I just don't know, but where I think it goes, and we didn't talk about the Beta origin story, but I'll touch on that really quick because I think this is part of the future. Is United Therapeutics is a phenomenal company. If you haven't checked them out, run by a woman named Martine Rothblatt, who started Sirius XM Radio, and then her daughter was born with a rare lung condition, and she sold Sirius XM Radio and created United Therapeutics and a suite of drugs to save her daughter's life. And our aircraft's name is Aaliyah, and it's named after Genesis Aaliyah Rothblatt, which is Martine's daughter. And we initially set out to build an organ distribution platform, and that's what the aircraft and charging was all about, because United Therapeutics is now on a mission, and they're making incredible strides by the end of the decade to have an unlimited supply of human organs for transplantation. So that's hundreds of thousands of organs movements a year. So part of the future is us moving around hundreds of thousands of organs to save people's lives and to change their lives for the better. And that's a core part of our organizing principle. Beyond that, we'll see continued adoption of urban air mobility. We'll see a lot more regional air mobility, rural health access use cases. If you think about, Mike, if you can drive the cost of flight down to the point where it's cheaper than driving, which is not too far from the case if you're still driving an internal combustion engine going from, a couple 100-mile trip.
Yeah.
Then you all of a sudden open up some of these 5,000 airports that are within 15 minutes of most of the U.S. population that are completely underutilized today, to new forms of air mobility, right? So you can now fly from these small little municipal airports, and there's 75 of them or 74 of them, I forget the exact number, in North Carolina alone, and only really 4 airports in North Carolina get any significant traffic. Really 3. Charlotte and Raleigh are the 2 that get the most, and there's a couple other that get a little bit more in Greensboro and elsewhere. But the point is, you can now access those 70 plus other airports in North Carolina with commercial air travel because the cost is low enough that the operators can afford to be there. As further to that, as batteries get better and better and better, you'll see bigger and bigger aircraft, right? There's no question in my mind that batteries, there's no reason to believe this will stop, that batteries at some point in this century will reach parity with jet fuel. And when that happens, it actually outperforms jet fuel, because the best turbine engine in the world is maybe 30% efficient in conversion of energy to thrust. And our motor's, north of 97, 98% efficient. So when you start to think about, okay, well, batteries now at parity with jet fuel, and the motor's 3 times more efficient, or 30 times more efficient, that you all of a sudden unlock these really important missions that, imagine transatlantic all electric travel in a quiet, clean aircraft. It just, so that's maybe not 10 years out, maybe not even 20, but that is the kind of part of the multi-decade approach that we're looking at here. And it's an exciting time to be in. We're just at the tipping point where the physics close for commercially viable missions, and it's only going to get better with bigger and bigger airframes coming online as that energy density is unlocked.
It's an amazing time for this industry. I've learned so much today, Blain, in talking to you. I just wanted to thank you on behalf of our audience and the National Electric Vehicle Consortium, which has sponsored this interview. Blain, you've really painted a picture of the future of flight for us. I really appreciate that.
Oh, not a problem at all, Mike. Thank you so much for the time, and let us know when we can get you in the simulator. We're looking forward to it.
Now we're talking. That's what I want to talk about.
Perfect.
Blain, thank you again and your colleagues for making this happen today.
No, not a problem. Thank you very much.
As we wrap up today, I encourage you to look into our show notes for additional resources. If you're interested in networking with academic, industry, and agency peers in the EV sector, and participating in meetings, grant opportunities, and technical publications, join our LinkedIn group. See the information in the show notes for that. And remember, connected, automated, electric.